The fog clings to the hollows of McDowell County like a wet blanket, the kind that soaks right through a man's jacket and settles into his bones long before he ever steps foot on the cage. It is 4 a.m, a time when the rest of the world is sleeping, dreaming of things light and easy. But here, in the heart of West Virginia, the world wakes up before the sun. It wakes up to the smell of strong coffee and the sound of heavy boots on gravel. Elias Thorne sat at his kitchen table, the laminate peeling slightly at the corner near where his elbow rested. He was 58 years old, and every one of those years was etched into the map of lines on his face. He stared into the black swirl of his coffee mug, his hands wrapped around the ceramic for warmth. Those hands were thick, the knuckles swollen from decades of vibration and impact, the skin permanently stained with the shadow of coal dust that no amount of scrubbing could ever truly wash away. It was the cold tattoo, the mark of the trade, as much a part of him as his blue eyes or his slow, deliberate drawl. Across the room, the refrigerator hummed, a rhythmic, comforting sound that anchored him to the house. He looked at the calendar on the wall. October the leaves were turning on the mountain, setting the hills on fire with oranges and reds, a stark contrast to the monochrome world he was about to enter. He had 6 months left. That was the deal he had made with Martha. 6 more months at the Black Creek mine. And then he would hang up his belt, turn in his check tag, and they would finally take that trip to the coast they had been talking about since 1995. Martha was still asleep in the other room. He could hear the soft rhythm of her breathing. He moved quietly, out of habit and out of reverence. He stood up, his knees popping a sound like dry twigs snapping, and grabbed his lunch pail. It was beaten silver metal, dented from 1,000 shifts, packed with a bologna sandwich, an apple, and a thermos of water. It wasn't much, but it was fuel. He stepped out onto the porch, the screen door creaking just enough to announce his departure to the crickets. The air smelled of damp earth and sulfur, the distinct perfume of the coalfields. Down in the valley, he could see the faint glow of the mine complex, the tipple standing like a cathedral of industry against the night sky. Elias climbed into his truck, the engine turning over with a reluctant groan. As he drove down the winding road, the headlights cutting through the mist, his mind wasn't on the danger. You can't think about the danger, or you'll never get out of the truck. You think about the job. You think about the tonnage. You think about the paycheck that keeps the lights on and the roof patched. But today, his mind drifted to the new kid Cal, Caleb Miller. They called him Cal. It was 22, green as spring grass, with a baby face that looked like it had never seen a razor. It was his 3rd week underground. Elias had been assigned to watch him, to keep him from getting killed, while he learned the difference between a safe roof and a wit. The boy was eager, full of questions, always trying to prove he was strong enough. Elias liked him, though he'd never say it to his face. He reminded Elias of himself 30 years ago, when the world seemed conquerable and the dust didn't make him cough in the mornings. The parking lot at Black Creek was filling up. Men moved in the half-light, silhouettes greeting each other with nods and grunts. There wasn't much chatter this early. The brotherhood of the mine was a quiet one, built on shared understanding rather than words. They gathered in the bathhouse, the room warm and humid, filled with the clatter of lockers and the rustle of heavy canvas clothes. Elias pulled on his coveralls, stiff with dried mud and grease. He laced his metatarsal boots, pulling the strings tight until they felt like part of his feet. He wrapped the heavy leather belt around his waist. Hooking on his self-rescued the canister that promised an hour of breathable air if the world caught fire. Finally, he put on his hard hat, adjusting the cap light. "Morning, Elias." A voice chirped. Elias looked up. Cal was standing there, grinning, looking absurdly awake. His gear was still too clean, his helmet shiny and "Morning, Cal," Elias grunted, standing up. "You check your light. Bright as a supernova." "Boss," Cal said, tapping the lamp. "Don't call me boss. And keep it on low until we get to the face. Save the battery. You never know how long a shift is really going to be." It was a standard warning, a piece of advice tossed out 1,000 times. But today, the words hung in the air a little longer than usual. They walked to the elevator. The cage. It was a rattling metal box that dropped you into the throat of the earth. As they crowded in with 20 other men, the banter started up jokes about football, complaints about the foreman, ribbing about who snored the loudest during the safety meeting. But as the cage lurched and began to descend, the voices trailed off. The descent was a sensory shift. The air pressure changed. Popping ears, the temperature stabilized to a constant 55 degrees, cool and damp. The smell of the outside world, pine, gasoline, rain vanished, replaced by the ancient, metallic scent of rock and coal. They were dropping 600 feet straight down, traveling back in time to a prehistoric swamp that had been crushed into black gold. When the gate opened at the bottom, they were in the pit. The main haulage road was wide, whitewashed with rock dust to prevent explosions, lit by strings of incandescent bulbs that stretched away into the gloom like a runway to nowhere. "All right, boys, let's get that coal." The section boss, a frantic man named Miller, no relation to Cal, shouted over the hum of the ventilation fans. Elias and Cal climbed into the Mentorship, a low-slung rail car designed to navigate the tunnels. They rode for 3 miles, deeper into the mountain, turning off the main line into the active section, Section 4 left. This was the Widowmaker seam. It was rich coal, high BTU, valuable stuff. But the geology was tricky. The roof was sandstone, interspersed with shale, prone to slipping if you didn't bolt it right. They reached the face, the end of the line where the coal was being cut. The noise was the first thing that hit you. The continuous miner, a massive machine with a rotating drum of tungsten carbide teeth, roared like a dragon. It chewed into the solid wall of coal, ripping it apart and feeding it onto a conveyor belt. The dust was thick here, a swirling black fog. Despite the water sprays and the massive ventilation curtains hanging from the roof, Elias operated the roof bolter, a critical job. Once the miner cut a 20-foot depth, Elias would move in with his machine to drill steel bolts into the ceiling, pinning the layers of rock together to keep the mountain from falling on their heads. Cal was his helper, spotting for him, handing him the 4-foot steel bolts and the resin glue cartridges. "Watch that top, Cal." Elias yelled over the machinery, pointing his light at a crack in the slate. "See that? That's a kettle bottom. Fossilized tree trunk. You drill into that wrong, it drops out like a loose tooth and crushes you flat." Cal nodded, his eyes wide, sweat streaking the dust on his face. He looked at the roof with a newfound respect. "Got it, Elias." The shift wore on 4 hours. 5 hours. The rhythm of the work took over. Drill, insert glue, insert bolt, spin, torque, move the machine. Drill, glue, bolt, torque. It was a dance. Elias had done 1,000,000 times. His arms ached, his back protested, but he worked with a fluid efficiency that mesmerized Cal. "You ever think about doing something else?" Cal asked, during a brief lull, as they sat on a pile of timber waiting for the miner to back out of a cut. They were sharing a bottle of water, the light from their helmets crossing in the dust. Elias wiped his mouth with the back of his glove. "Every day since 1982, he said. "But the mine pays the mortgage, and it put my daughter through nursing school. It's honest work." "Cal?" "Hard, but honest. What about you? You got big dreams." Cal smiled, his teeth startlingly white in the darkness. I'm saving for a ring. Sarah, down at the diner, I'm gonna ask her come Christmas. Figure I work here 2 years, save up enough for a down payment on the old Henderson place, then maybe learn to be an electrician. Elias, he knew the Henderson place. It was a nice plot of land with a creek running through it. That's a good plan, son. Just don't get stuck. The coal has a way of grabbing onto you. Just then, the ground shuddered. It wasn't the normal vibration of the continuous miner. This was different. Deep. A low-frequency thump that you felt in your stomach more than you heard. The air pressure in the tunnel spiked, popping their ears violently. Elias stood up instantly, his instincts screaming, "Shut it down!" He yelled, though the miner operator couldn't hear him. Then came the sound, a tearing noise, like the sky ripping open, followed by a thunderous roar that drowned out the machinery. The wind hit them, first a blast of air pushed by thousands of tons of falling rock. "Run!" Elias grabbed Cal by the shoulder, shoving him toward the crosscut, away from the face. But they were too slow, or the mountain was too fast. The roof 20 yards behind them gave way. It wasn't just a few rocks, it was the main roof. The sandstone layer had snapped. A massive curtain of debris crashed down, sealing off the tunnel behind them. The lights on the Mentorship were extinguished instantly. The ventilation fans wind and died. The conveyor belt stopped with a screech of tearing metal. Then silence. Absolute, heavy, suffocating silence. The dust billowed up in a choking cloud, blinding them even with their cap lights on. Elias coughed, pulling his shirt up over his nose. "Cal! Cal! I'm here!" Cal's voice was high, trembling, coming from the floor. "I'm here, Elias. I can't see. Stay down. Let the dust settle." Elias forced his voice to be steady, though his heart was hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He reached out, feeling the rough wall of coal. He crawled forward until his hand found Cal's boot. "I got you." "You hurt?" I don't think so. My knee is banged up." "What happened?" "Roof fall. A big one." Elias stood up slowly, testing the air. It was still breathable, but the flow had stopped. The ventilation curtains were buried. That meant no fresh air was coming in, and the methane gas that naturally seeped from the coal would begin to build up. He swept his light around. They were in a room, a section of the tunnel about 20 feet wide and 60 feet long. Ahead of them was the solid face of unmined coal. Behind them was a wall of rubble, jagged slabs of sandstone and shale piled to the ceiling. They were trapped. "Try the radio," Cal said, scrambling for the mine phone mounted on the pillar. Elias didn't stop him, but he knew the answer. The wires ran along the roof. When the roof came down, the lines were severed. Cal cranked the handle, shouting into the receiver. "Hello? Outside? Anyone? This is Section 4. We're trapped." Static. Dead silence. Cal dropped the receiver, sliding down the wall, his breathing coming in short, panic-stricken gasps. "Oh, God! Oh, God, we're buried! We're gonna die in here." Elias moved quickly. He grabbed Cal by the straps of his overalls and shook him. "Look at me. Look at me, son." He shone his light into Cal's eyes, blinding him momentarily to snap him out of the spiral. "Panic uses oxygen. We don't have oxygen to waste. You hear me?" Cal nodded, tears cutting tracks through the dust on his cheeks. "I hear you. We are alive. As long as we are breathing, we are in the fight. Now, check your rescuer. Is it damaged?" "No." "Good. Keep it ready. If the air gets bad, or if you smell rotten eggs, you pop that seal." But not yet. Elias took stock of their inventory. They had their lunch pails, 2 liters of water, 2 sandwiches, their cap lights. Elias checked his battery pack. Maybe 10 hours of light, if they dimmed them. "Sit tight," Elias said. He walked to the wall of rubble. He examined the rocks. They were massive, karst boulders. There was no digging through this. Not with hand tools. It would take heavy machinery from the other side. "How long?" Cal asked, his voice small. "Depends," Elias said, sitting down next to him on a pile of cribbing blocks. "The boss knows we're here. The continuous miner operator. He might have got out, or he might be under that rock. But they know where the shift was. They know where we were bolting. Will they come?" Elias looked at the boy. "They're miners, Cal. They'd move the whole damn mountain with a teaspoon to get us." 3,000 feet above them, the sun was rising over the ridge, burning off the fog. But at the Thorn House, the phone rang. It was a sound Martha hated. The 6 a.m. ring. It was never good news. She picked it up, her hand shaking. "Martha, it's Jim, the superintendent." Her knees gave way. She sat down hard on the hallway floor. "Is he?" "There's been a fall, Martha." Section 4. "We've lost contact with Elias and the new boy, Miller. We don't know anything yet. But the rescue teams are suiting up now. You need to come down to the bathhouse." The drive to the mine was a blur. When she arrived, the scene was chaotic but controlled. State police cars with flashing lights, an ambulance idling. But the most striking sight was the families. The wives, the mothers, the brothers. They stood by the chain-link fence, huddled in coats, staring at the portal. Martha found Sarah, Cal's girlfriend. The girl was young, but barely 20, sobbing into her hands. Martha, despite her own terror, felt the steel of a coal miner's wife stiffen her spine. She walked over and put an arm around the girl. "He's strong, honey," Martha whispered, "and he's with Elias. If anyone can get a boy out of a hole, it's my husband. He knows that mountain better than he knows his own backyard." Inside the command center, the mood was grim. Maps were spread out on tables. The superintendent, Jim, was talking to the mine rescue team captain. "The fall is extensive. Maybe 100 feet of blocked tunnel," Jim said, tracing a line on the map. "We can't go through it fast enough. The roof is still unstable." "What about drilling?" the captain asked. "We've got a rig coming from Charleston. We're going to punch a hole right here." He pointed to a spot on the topography map. "Into the crosscut, where they should be. If they're alive, that's where they are. We can send down a microphone. Air, water." "How deep?" 640 feet. "And the air in there." Jim hesitated. "If the ventilation is cut, they've got maybe 12 hours before the methane gets too high, or the oxygen runs out. We have to hurry." Act 3. The darkness. Time under growl loses its meaning. There is no sunrise, no sunset, just the endless dark and the drip, drip, drip of water. Elias and Cal sat in the dark. They had turned their lights off to save battery, sitting in a blackness so profound it felt like a physical weight pressing against their eyes. "Tell me about Sarah," Elias said. He needed to keep the boy talking, keep him awake. Carbon dioxide buildup makes you sleepy, and if you fall asleep when the gas is high, you don't wake up. She laughs really loud," Cal said, his voice echoing in the small space. Throws her head back, and she makes the best biscuits. She wants to open a bakery someday. Sounds like a keeper, Elias said. Martha, she's a reader, reads everything. Romances, histories, serial boxers. She's the smart one. I'm just the back. You think they're digging? I know they are. I can feel it. Elias wasn't lying. He pressed his ear against the coal rib. The coal seam is a conductor. It carries sound for miles. Listen! Cal leaned over, pressing his ear to the cold, black rock. Thump, thump, thump. It was faint, distant, but rhythmic. That's the bolters, Elias said. They're securing the roof on the other side of the falls so the rescue team can advance. They're coming, Cal. But the air was getting heavy. Elias could feel a headache starting behind his eyes, a dull throb that signaled rising CO2. He checked his watch by the brief flash of his light. 7 hours had passed. I'm thirsty, Cal whispered. Take a sip. Just a sip. They sat in silence for a while longer. Then Cal spoke up, his voice trembling. Elias, I saw something. What? Over there, by the overcast. I saw a light. Elias turned his light on. The beam cut through the dust. Nothing but rock and timber. There's no light, son. Just us. No, I saw it. It looked like my grandpa. Hallucinations. Bad sign. The oxygen was dropping. Cal, listen to me. Put your rescuer on. Now, I don't need it. Dot! Put it on! Elias barked, his voice commanding. They fumbled with the metal canisters, popping the seals. They bit down on the rubber mouthpieces and put the clips on their noses. The chemical reaction in the canister would generate oxygen, but it got hot. The air tasted metallic and dry, burning the throat. But it was air. They sat there, looking like aliens in the glow of the single cap light Elias left on. The heat from the chemical reaction warmed their chests. Elias closed his eyes and prayed. He didn't pray for a miracle. He prayed for strength. Just let me get this boy home, he thought. I've lived my life. I've seen my daughter grow, but he's just starting. Don't take him, Lord. Not today. 12 hours. The rescue team above ground was frantic. The drill rig had arrived. A massive tower of steel. They had set it up on the ridgeline, using GPS coordinates to aim for a target the size of a school bus, 600 feet down, through solid rock. Drilling commencing! The foreman shouted. The rig roared to life. The bit chewed into the earth. Down below, the sound changed. It wasn't the distant thump of mining anymore. It was a high-pitched grinding, coming from the ceiling. Elias pulled the mouthpiece out for a second. You hear that? Cal nodded, eyes wide behind his safety glasses. That's the angels singing. Boy, that's a rescue drill. They scrambled toward the sound. It was coming from the center of the room. The grinding got louder and louder, until it was deafening. Dust began to fall from the roof. Then, with a sudden crack, the roof broke. A steel drill bit, 6 inches wide, punched through the sandstone and spun freely in the air, like glorious, blinding sunlight shot down the narrow pipe. It was only a beam the size of a dinner plate, but to Elias and Cal, it was the most beautiful thing they had ever seen. The drill stopped. The pipe was lowered. A phone was lowered down the hole on a wire. Elias grabbed it, his hands shaking. Hello, Elias. This is Jim. You boys? All right. Elias laughed. A dry, raspy sound. We're Dusty, Jim, and Cal here. Needs a change of underwear. But we're breathing. Up on the surface, the command center, men were hugging, throwing hats on the ground. Martha dropped to her knees, sobbing with relief, clutching Sarah's hand. "We're sending down air," Jim said. "And water. And food. The rescue team is about 40 feet from you on the inside. They're digging through the fall. Hang tight. Act 5. The rescue. It took another 10 hours for the rescue team to break through the rubble. Elias and Cal spent the time sitting under the drill hole, breathing the sweet, cool air being pumped down from the surface. They ate sandwiches sent down in a capsule. They wrote notes to their families. When the first light of a rescue miner broke through the wall of fallen rock, it was blinding. A hand reached through a gap in the stones. "Grab hold!" a voice yelled. They widened the hole, moving rocks by hand. The rescue team members, their faces black with dust, but their eyes shining, pulled Cal through first. They passed him down the line like a bucket of water. Then they reached for Elias. "Come on, old-timer," the rescue captain said, gripping Elias's forearm. "Time to go home." The ride out on the man trip felt like a victory parade. When they reached the bottom of the elevator shaft, the cage was waiting. As they rose, the air pressure changed again. The smell of sulfur faded. The cage doors opened at the surface. It was night again. 24 hours had passed since they went in. The floodlights of the mineyard were blinding. But through the glare, Elias saw her. Martha ran past the police line. Past the superintendent, she hit him with the force of a linebacker, burying her face in his filthy, coal-stained neck. "I told you," Elias whispered into her hair, tears finally cutting through the dust on his face. "I told you I'd be home for dinner. I'm just a little late." Nearby, Cal was being smothered by his parents and Sarah. He looked over at Elias. The two men locked eyes. A silent exchange passed between them, a bond forged in the dark that no one else would ever understand. Epilogue. The legacy. 6 months later. The spring sun was warm on the porch of the Thorn house. The dogwoods were in bloom. Elias sat in his rocking chair, a glass of iced tea in his hand. His breathing was better, though the cough still caught him sometimes in the damp mornings. He wasn't wearing his boots. He was wearing sneakers. A truck pulled into the driveway. It was a new Ford, shiny and red. Cal stepped out. He looked older, filled out. He walked with a different stride, now more confident, less hurried. "Afternoon." "Elias," Cal said, walking up the steps. "Afternoon, Cal. You look cleaner than usual." "I took the job," Cal said, leaning against the railing. "Electrical apprenticeship, starting Monday." Elias smiled. "Smart move. Stay out of the hole." "I wanted to thank you," Cal said, his voice dropping, "for keeping my head straight down there." "I wouldn't be here without you. You did the work, Cal. I just pointed the light." Cal reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He opened it to show a modest diamond ring. "I asked her. She said yes." Elias nodded, looking out at the mountains. They were beautiful from here. Green, majestic, silent. They held secrets, and they held graves. But they also held the lifeblood of the community. "Congratulations, son," Elias said. "Now, go on. You got a future to build." Cal shook his hand affirm, strong grip, and walked back to his truck. Elias watched him go. Then Martha came out through the screen door, carrying a travel brochure. "Florida," she said, sitting next to him. "Or maybe the Carolinas. What do you think?" Elias took her hand, his thumb tracing the knuckles. He looked at the cold dust that was still faintly visible in the creases of his skin, a permanent reminder of the price he had paid. Then he looked at his wife, the woman who had waited through the long nights. "Let's go to the ocean, Martha," he said. "I want to see something that stretches out forever and doesn't have a roof." He closed his eyes, listening to the wind in the trees, grateful for the light, grateful for the air, and grateful for the quiet peace of a promise kept.